So, we have got a very attractive first frame here on this video from Evan 4K. I have never seen this individual's work before, but a bunch of people sent this to me and they were like, hey, this guy has some good conversation. You should check this out. I watched the first couple of minutes and I was like, you know what? I will. So shout out to Evan. I'm going to link this in the chat if any of you want to watch it or update it, all that good stuff. And I'll do that again at the end. So let's see what Evan has to say for 5 reasons Guild Wars 2 frustrates players.
Guild Wars 2 has proven that it is one of the best MMOs on the market, launching over 10 years.
Hold on a second. I just remembered there are some mere mortals here. I will slow it down from my normal YouTube speed.
Guild Wars 2 has proven that it is one of the best MMOs on the market, launching over 10 years ago and still going strong. But you can't have good without the bad. There are always things that could be improved, some things that might not be very good for the game. I've talked a lot in the past about the best things about Guild Wars 2. Now it's time to acknowledge...
Why did no one link me that one? I have never seen this individual's work before now. No one linked me, hey Muck, you should check out this video on the best things about Guild Wars 2. I know, I hear about this guy when he makes a video about the horrible things about Guild Wars 2. Then a bunch of people link it to me. You guys are such drama addicts. Oh my god.
Some of the worst things. Or maybe if you don't want to be too negative, we can just call it areas of improvement. The first thing that I have to acknowledge right off the bat is that the game is too easy. Of course, this could be subjective, but
I'll let him finish making his point, then I'll do input.
But hear me out on this. Generally speaking, every combat encounter is pretty straightforward. There isn't a whole lot of complexity to fighting at all. Once you grasp the basic mechanics, such as a rotation, avoiding red AoE circles, and dodge rolling away from danger, that's about it. It doesn't go much further from there.
Okay, so as he's saying this, he's showing open world. And he's right. I just recently did the Hardcore Craftlock Challenge, where I went through the entire base game all the way up to Zaitan on a character without ever dying. And you know what? It wasn't even difficult. There was a couple of times when I was like, there's some guys fighting a bounty over there. It's a gold mob, I'll join in. Whoa, I got clipped, almost died. That was a mistake. But that was when I was like punching way above my pay grade. Like anything else was fine. And there's a few reasons for that. Like most of the mobs don't have curveballs. Like you don't find a mob that occasionally has warrior greatsword skills, you know, or mobs that have stun breaks. You know, like if they wanted to make the open world harder, I would say one, like sprinkle some class abilities onto some of the random mobs, you know, do something like that. And then also another reason that the world is very, very easy. And I'm not asking them to change this. I'm just saying it. We get fully healed when we're out of combat after like 2 seconds. That is part of the reason that hardcore challenges in games like World of Warcraft are so freaking difficult, is when you get out of combat and you're like barely escape, you gotta find a place where you can sit down and eat a chicken wing for 30 seconds because you're still in danger. Like you're still low health and you're trying to find a safe spot where you can rest. We just snap back to full in like 2 seconds. So like, and again, in games like WoW, and I'm just comparing it to WoW because I've played a lot of WoW in the past. In games like WoW, if you are fighting and you get just like a second mob or a third mob aggroed onto you, that's really scary. In our game, you're naturally faster than almost everything. You could just run circles around them, shooting them. We have a self-heal that pops every 20 to 24 seconds, depending on the class. Like our sustain is stupid compared to everything else. I will say that you know that doesn't apply to the whole game. Like game is too easy, obviously doesn't apply to everything. There are fractal challenge modes, there are raid challenge modes that are just infinitely harder. But it is very common for players to get to max level doing 2 to 4k DPS, and they don't realize the people around them are doing 30. Like the disparity is very wide. Like in World of Warcraft, if you got the best hunter in the game pumping damage and the worst hunter in the game pumping damage, let's say this is the difference between them. In our game, if you've got the best ranger in the game pumping damage, the worst ranger in the game is like way down here. He's below the healers. Like it is shocking how wide the disparity can be, because we have so much freedom in things like buildcraft, you know? Like, you can make some truly awesome and some truly horrible things.
Open world event, meta event, dungeon, fractal, raid can be completed with not much difficulty. A large contributor to this, I would say, is power creep. Over the years, new things like elite specs or stat combos have been added to.
This is true. Back, like, if you just like look at the game 8 years ago and look at the game now, that it's blatantly obvious. When the Heart of Thorns added raids, it was scaled so that each person in the raid was doing like, if everyone in the raid that was a DPS was doing like 8 to 10k, you could kill the boss. Now, again, we're pumping like 30. If you're on a group and you're fighting Gorseval and you actually have to do the gliding mechanic, most people think you're bad. If you've only been raiding a few months, you might not even know he has a gliding mechanic because your group's just blasted through it every time. Like we skip entire phases of boss mechanics these days. So yeah, the power creep is absolutely a thing. That's why not long ago when they did that big nerf to everyone, they were trying to nerf everyone by about 15% across the board. And people asked me what I thought about it. I was like, great, they need to do it like 2 more times. Now, no one agreed with me. They're not hiring Mukluk, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, it's still crazy. Also, just this latest round of elite specs, every one of them, like Ritualist, Luminary, Paragon, they came onto the scene busted. And some of them have been nerfed a bit in that latest round of nerfs, but for the most part, they are all still pretty busted. So yeah, power creep is a thing.
The game. And most of the time, they are more effective than the old ones, which leads the older ones to be rebalanced.
And when he says most of the time, it's like 95% of the time. There are some niche situations, mostly in PvP, where you could be like, oh yeah, core necro is great. But when you're in anything PvE, elite spec is better than the non-elite spec. Like 99.9% of the time in PvE. In PvP, you could be like, oh yeah, you can make core engineer work. You can make a core necro work, sure. But it's it's like when you had Firebrand as that elite specialization, you get 3 additional weapons. Like that's staggeringly good.
Along with the new. However, older content doesn't usually get changed. So this old content that was originally created without any of these new things in mind will now be very easy to complete. I have noticed that I don't really feel challenged anymore in this game, and that can feel really boring. Open world events always succeed if there are a few players there. Meta events never fail if you're in a populated map. Even
I will say that is true, with the exception of the one time they tried to make a really tough open world event and there was a lot of kickback on that, and that was Dragon's End. Dragon's End can still fail. But yeah, I would agree with him that most metas on most maps, you got enough bodies there and you're gonna win it.
fractals or raids are generally not that bad. I have taken players that have never done fractals before into tier 3 or 4, and they have been totally fine. They're not a liability, they're not falling behind. I honestly think that over the years the game has just gotten too easy. Sure, there are outlier areas like legendary difficulty raids, but that's just one single thing in this massive game. The development has gone in a direction of making the game more accessible, so that could explain why a low overall difficulty is what they're going for. However, for many players there is no challenge anymore. The difficulty just isn't there. So if you're a player that likes to push for difficult content or just have a little challenge every once in a while, you won't find that here in Guild Wars 2. The first point
as he failed. I like how he says you won't find challenge here as he shows footage of him failing a mechanic, getting knocked off a boat into a school of piranhas. That was certainly a choice to play that footage at that moment, but I respect it.
It can segue right into the next one, and that is combat does not require skill. Now I know that's quite a bold claim, but I think it's the unfortunate truth. Of course combat can require skill, but generally speaking, widely across the game, it doesn't.
Okay, thinking about this statement, I would say that even if you don't know what you're doing, but you know how to move out of red circles and hit your heal button when you need to heal and hit the enemy, you will win most fights. But if you do know what you're doing, you'll win them 10 times faster. Let's see what he has to say.
Start with combat at an individual level. Whatever build you're using, there will be an ideal rotation in which to use your skills. If you were to just randomly spam your skills with no care, you will still deal a decent amount of damage. Of course, you could deal more damage if you follow the recommended rotation, but if you don't, Nothing bad even happens. And I have tested this. I've been in a raid before where I just randomly start pressing buttons, just disregard my rotation completely. And it was totally fine.
So he played like an elementalist.
Wasn't even the lowest DPS player, if you could believe it. Some builds can be more complex than others, but many builds have been created to allow you to put in the least amount of effort possible. Those low effort builds even sometimes out DPS the complex high skill builds, which I think illustrates my point that combat doesn't require skill. When in a group, things get even easier. Group content has evolved to consist of standing in one place, stacked on top of your squad. Your whole squad will be loaded up with every buff, boon, and heal they.
I have done videos where I had talked about the boon system in the game and how I would change it, but he's absolutely right. Like, I would love a world where the people, like the Deadeyes with rifles and the Rangers with longbows, were in the back and shooting, and not stacked with the people with daggers and swords. Let them live their class fantasy. I would love that. But there are two things that prevent that. One is the boon system, and everybody's stacking for boons, and the second is the heal system, which is everybody is stacking for heals. If you're in World v World, then there's a third thing, which is damage distribution, which by everyone being piled up, and the enemy is constantly firing attacks that hit 5 people at a time into a pile of 50 people, it's really easy to distribute that damage and keep people alive. But because of the boon and the heal system, PvE is always stacked, and thus the ranged people are stacked with the melee most of the time. And I also wish that was different. I have talked on that before.
Could need. Some combat mechanics you can actually just ignore because your squad will just out-heal it. And this circles right back around into the first point that the game is too easy. Since combat as a whole generally doesn't require skill, that ends up making the game far too easy. Okay, now let's move on to a different topic. The next worst thing about Guild Wars 2 is the content release format. This is something that even longtime players cannot deny anymore, myself included.
Okay, before he even says it, I'm curious if he's going to be talking about the yearly release cadence or the fact that over the lifetime of the game, they have changed the format like 4 times. So I'm wondering like what he's going to focus on here.
I will admit I used to ignore this or even make excuses for it. The way content is released for Guild Wars 2 has changed a lot over the years, and it gives the feeling of getting less content or even getting underdeveloped, rushed content. If we look back at early expansions like Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire, or End of Dragons,
Okay, hold on. So these two, sure, but there was like a 5 or 6 year gap between these two where we thought the game was done and they weren't adding anything more. So I would not call End of Dragons an early expansion because it was a long time after release that they finally came back and did EOD, and we were all pleasantly surprised that they were making more.
It released as a whole complete expansion with living story episodes in between to bridge the gaps. However, now on the newer expansions like Secrets of the Obscure, Janthier Wilds, or Visions of Eternity, they now release the expansion in separate blocks each quarter. While this does allow them to have more content releases over the course of a year, it ends up making each release smaller, which gives the feeling that the whole expansion is smaller. Secrets of the Obscure launched August 22nd, 2023. Only story chapter 1 to 10 and access to 2 maps. November 7th, 2023, the next 3 chapters and gave access to a small part of the 3rd map. February 27th, 2024, 3 more chapters and added another portion of that 3rd map. May 21st, 2024, the last 3 chapters and the last little portion of that 3rd map. So
really quickly here, in case a non-Guild Wars 2 player is watching this, just to show, like, here's the world map, blah, blah, blah. So Secrets of the Obscure was this. So there was this, and there was this city, and then there was this. And then in the first release, you got a third of this map. And on the second release, you got a third of this map. And on the third release, you got a third of this map. And then, let me tell you, like, the players weren't really happy with that, but neither was the company. They were like, you know what? We see that y'all didn't like this, and they didn't do that again. So he's completely right, but I will point out that they seem to have learned from that, because they didn't freaking do that again. So I think it's worth saying that. I think it's worth throwing that out there.
So instead of releasing an expansion all at once, they spread it out over each quarter, and they have followed this format for the next expansions as well. You could look at this and say,
okay, so they followed this format for the next expansions as well. Kind of. So they did do the quarterly releases. So that was Secrets of the Obscure. Janthier Wilds had this map and this map at launch. And then we also had like a Convergence and a Raid right here. And then later on, they added this map. And then on another release, they added this map. You have to zoom in for the fog of war to go away. So there was more bigger maps on this one. They didn't do the thing where they just cut up a map into 3 slices. So they definitely learned with that before going to Janthier. And then currently, we're in Visions of Eternity, and there was one big full map, a second big full map at launch, and then we just had a quarterly release thing, and then they added this big map, and then there is one more big map that is supposed to be coming for a total of 4 big maps for that yearly cycle. So they did learn from that. Also, I don't know when he's going to pause here, so I want to say this now. He mentioned, like, he made comparisons to Living World and like End of Dragons and stuff like that. The game had this system called Living World, and if you're not a Guild Wars 2 player, I want to touch on that really fast. Living World is kind of like free content updates that they were adding. And so there was like the base game, there was like Living World Season 1 and 2, which was just like patches with story and maybe a few maps. Then Heart of Thorns. If you're playing for the story, you wanted to play the Living World before that. And then there was some Living World stuff, and then there was Path of Fire, and then there was some Living World stuff, and then there was like a 5-year period where everybody thought they were done with the game. Then I guess they got more funding, and then they made End of Dragons. Now, Living World stuff, if you were an active player when it came out, you just received it as like a free content update. It was just added to your account and unlocked forever. But if you came to the game later, then you would have to pay to unlock it. And you'd pay gems, which is either cash 2 gems using the cash shop in the game, or gold 2 gems. So if you just had played the game a ton, you could turn gold into that. Now, that is a terrible business plan. When your product is brand new and it's the most desired, they gave it away for free. And then later, when it was less desired, they put a price tag on it. And I can only, and again, this is for a game that did not have a subscription model. So I can only imagine this was terrible for business. And they did stop doing that. Because like, if you think about it, they had Path of Fire, and then the whole time they were doing Living World Season 4, the only time they would make money is if a new player bought the expansions, or if they sold some pretty outfits in the gem store, or something like that. So I don't know what their bottom line was, but it can't have been good. And I think the fact that they stopped doing that shows that it was not successful for them. So I think that's worth mentioning, that like, yeah, they were releasing more free stuff, but it was probably running them out of business doing it the way they were doing it, which is why they stopped.
Well, it lets them have more content releases. However, each of those releases is quite small. Most of the time, players will fly through each release in the first day or two. There could be many reasons as to why they do it this way. We won't know for sure. My theory is that expansions are not completely done by the time of the initial release. So the quarterly release schedule lets them work on an expansion little bits at a time, instead of having the complete product ready to go all at once.
So again, going back to his calendar, when they released the final chunk of Secrets of the Obscure, the next expansion, Janthier Wilds, was released 3 months later. Yeah, it wasn't done. Because they were trying out a yearly release schedule, it was like, game comes out 3 months after launch, here's another chunk of it. 6 months after launch, here's another chunk of it. And 9 months after launch, here's the last chunk of it. 1 year after launch, here's the next expansion. And keep in mind, they've got a smaller dev team than something like Blizzard. So yeah, they were absolutely just, they had a pipeline, and their goal was every 3 months, have a quarter of a new expansion complete. And they did that for, we're going on 3 years of them doing that.
Maybe that's a more manageable workflow for them, who knows. But I think the issue with this is that it gives players the feeling that content releases are becoming smaller and development might even be slowing down. It might also make players lose interest in the current expansion, since they only get to play a few episodes, then have to wait months for the next one. It's not...
I think that depends on who you ask, because there are some players that love raids, and they love doing the same raids over and over and over, or the same fractals over and over, or PvP, or World v World. And they are very happy to go months, maybe even years, just doing their favorite game mode. And when a release cycle releases something that affects that game mode, they are super excited. Like, new builds come out in this expansion, and that it causes a ripple effect across every game mode in the game. Now you've got ritualists running out around in World v World. You've got luminaries running around in PvP. You've got gale shots, and things like that. And, this affects all of the game modes. And, with the story, it's like, yeah, the story is getting released slowly, but I would say that it's, like, I personally, I like the story. I criticize the story when it's bad. I am happy when it's good. So I do comment on the story, but it's like there's so much in this game that when you're waiting on the story to come out with the next chunk, it's not like there's nothing else to do. I see where he's coming from, but I wanted to just share my thoughts on that.
Uncommon for some players to wait until an expansion is completely released before buying. That way they can better determine if it will be worth it for them. If a full expansion is released and turns out to be underwhelming, they'll probably just pass on it. We're going to stay on the topic of expansions for the next point. The next worst thing about Guild Wars 2 is that expansion content feels required just to play the game. Now, I'm not just talking about getting the expansions to get more of the story or open up access to more.
Probably going to talk about power creep with elite specs.
The world. It actually goes a lot further than that. The first bit is elite specs. Now, this is an obvious one. Elite specs offer...
Second bit is going to be things like expanded weapon proficiencies, weapon master training.
Many new ways to play your chosen class. They open up many possibilities in build crafting. However, the elite specs are all much better than the core classes. So if you were to, say, go into high-level fractals as a core class, you would feel at a disadvantage than the other players playing elite specs. Some elite specs can apply boons like quickness and alacrity or offer healing. Since group content requires those things, what happens if you don't have the spec to fill those roles and your party needs you to do that? You might be out of luck and get in the boot. Elite specs...
Okay, so really quick on this note, normal group content in this game, you look at a group of 5 people, right, for like dungeons or fractals. There is a healer, there is a offensive support, so there is a person who is providing buffs to the party that the healer was not able to provide, and then there's 3 greedy DPSs. Now, could a core build fulfill one of those DPS roles? Absolutely. Just because, you aren't a healer doesn't mean you get the boot unless you joined and said you were a healer and then they're like, why aren't you healing? Then of course, but there are still three of 5 slots of any party can be fulfilled by anyone. However, he is absolutely right that almost always elite specs are better than core classes at whatever they do in PvE. In PvP, not always true, but in PvE, yes.
Are of course not mandatory to play the game, but I think it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge that they offer significant benefits.
They do.
And will make certain content easier since elite spec builds can be much more effective. But there
However, I would also say, just to, devil's advocate here, if you, let's say you were playing Guild Wars 2, and then an expansion came out, and they're like, we added new elite specs. They're worse than the current ones. What the hell would we have to get excited about? Of course, they are going to put good, desirable things in their expansions to make you want to buy it. That's true for literally any game, right? Now, I mean, their goal should make it, like, their goal should be that the new stuff is of equal power to what you have, but provides a different, interesting way to play. Like maybe if the game didn't have an archer, they add an archer. Or if it didn't have a guy that could shoot fireball out of his hands, now there's a guy that shoots fireballs out of his hands. It provides a new way of playing, but what it does should be nearly as effective as the things it's competing with. That's not always the case. However, I think it's natural for a game to add features that make you want to buy the expansion when you get the expansion. Like, imagine, like, someone's playing Warcraft 3, and they're playing against someone else, and the other person bought the Frozen Throne expansion, and the other guy's got access to, like, the Pit Lord hero, or the Goblin Tinker, and, like the Dark Ranger, the Crypt Lord, and he's like, this is pay to win. It's like, well, yeah, he bought the expansion. Like, I think it's completely natural in any game that there is power in the expansion because the game developers want you to buy it.
There are other things. Raids are locked behind expansions. Certain legendary
To be clear, that's the specific expansion. Like, the Heart of Thorns raids require Heart of Thorns. The Path of Fire raids require Path of Fire, etc., etc. It's not like you have to always have the most recent expansion to access all raids. It's like each chunk is with whatever it came with.
Free gear is locked behind expansions.
This guy's an idiot. No, Sand, I don't agree with that at all. I do agree with what he's saying, but at the same time, I think it's worth pointing out that some of this is okay.
Many maps with some of the best open world content is all locked behind expansions. Game-changing masteries like mounts or gliding, locked behind expansions.
Again, that is to make them desirable so you purchase that. If you take everything interesting that they've added in expansions and make it free, there's no reason at all you would buy the expansions. And then how do they make money? We start getting a monthly bill, like World of Warcraft. Like, yes, they need to have the expansion things locked behind the expansions.
We cannot deny that the expansion content feels required if you want to be able to keep up with other players.
Okay, so I will say, because I got a referral link, I'm basically selling this game all the time to people. Now, I don't work for Arena though, so I can always also say when something sucks, and that's fine. Usually, if I get someone new into the game, and they're like, what expansions do I need? What I usually tell them is you can play 100 hours or hundreds of hours with just the free-to-play base game before deciding if you want to buy anything, right? Yeah, you can get to max level on the free trial if you want to, which is very generous compared to many MMOs. You can get all the way to max level, you could do like world map completion, and then decide if you wanted to get an expansion or something like that. And while you're waiting, you could see if maybe a sale happens before that time comes. You don't have to buy it right away. Now, if you like Guild Wars 2, buying the expansions gives you more Guild Wars 2. It gives you more stuff to do if you are like, man, that was great, I want more of that. But you don't have to do that right away. Now, he's talking about comparing to other players, and I agree with him. If you are in a raid and you're a core warrior and the guy next to you is a berserker, he's probably going to do more damage than you. If you are a core guardian and the guy next to you is like a willbender, he'll probably be more effective than you. Not always, but frequently. And I do agree with him on that.
Thing I want to touch on here is old content. Old content has been forgotten. The focus of development has been put entirely on new content to the point where old content gets ignored. Just look at dungeons.
Okay, hold on. He is right, but I think that's a weird thing to focus on because, like, how often does World of Warcraft go back and buff Ragefire Chasm? I think they did it once, like when Cataclysm came out. Or how often do they go back and revamp the Dead Mines? I mean, they really don't. Now, I agree with him. It is true that they don't often go back and like overhaul old content, but I don't think most MMOs do. Now, believe me, I would love for them to change the finale of the Zaytan fight. It's hella stupid. I would love, like, dungeons, like, you've got something that they could, like, give those a makeover and then add them to the fractal pool, if they did some touch-ups on them, and, like, half the work's already done. So I do agree with what he's saying, but I find it odd that he's focusing on that.
When was the last time you even cared about dungeons at all? Except for maybe the rare times when they give a little dungeon rush event to make us think that they care about dungeons. When was
usually the last time I cared about a dungeon? I think I was working on the Legendary Rebreather and I had to do a dungeon for it.
The last time you were excited to go to a base game map to do anything? Have you ever thought,
a base game map? Dude, okay, I do that for like world bosses and stuff almost daily. Like, Triple Trouble and Shadow Behemoth and stuff like that. I go to base game maps daily. So, yeah, that'll depend on who you ask. But, I mean, there are some people I know that never leave World v. World. So it truly depends on who you ask.
Oh boy, I can't wait to play the same mid-level fractals again for the 100th time. A lot of the game's older content has no reason to do it. Either the rewards are not there or the content just isn't engaging. So experienced players won't bother touching it at all. But where I think this is
To be fair, other than when I had to do a dungeon for the Legendary Rebreather, I haven't done dungeons in a very, very long time. So he is right. He's right.
Bigger problem is the newer players who are just getting to that content for the first time will have no one to play it with. They might try to get a group for a dungeon only to wait an hour with no one joining. They could wander around.
So if anyone here is watching this and they haven't played Guild Wars 2 before, the reason is that dungeons were replaced by a thing called fractals. And so fractals are shorter and they pay better. So it's kind of a win-win. They absolutely should go back to dungeons and revisit stuff. I 100% agree with him. I don't know if they ever will. But the reason that dungeons are, often lacking in people is because all the people interested in 5-man content are doing fractals. There's also another thing called dragon response missions. Same thing. It was deemed less profitable than fractals, so most people do fractals instead of DRMs or dungeons.
Maps and not come across anyone. Open world events might actually fail since there's no one nearby to help them or show them mechanics.
Okay, so open world events can fail. To be fair, there's hundreds of events in the game happening at any given moment. Okay, yes, they can fail, absolutely. But open world metas, like the event chains that lead to world bosses, where like the branded Shatterer comes down, which is a huge dragon covered in crystal, lands and you fight him with an army, or the Shadow Behemoth comes out of the ground, or the monster that comes out of the volcano in Mount Maelstrom, you almost never see a shortage of people there unless it's like the middle of the night on that server. If it's like, 4 a.m. on EU and no one on EU is awake right now, or same thing with NA, then you might see nobody there. But I do world bosses frequently, and I cannot remember the last time I saw a shortage of players at one of these things in open world.
It makes sense that the focus is on new content, but there needs to be a balance of new content and working to better the older existing content.
I 100% agree. I have told people before that my vision I would love to see fulfilled for the game is have, if you've got right now, let's say they've got 100% of their dev team. I'm going to make up numbers. Let's say they got 10 devs and they're all working on new stuff. I would love if they just had like 8 or 9 devs working on new stuff, and then the last 1 or 2 devs constantly working on the oldest problem in their queue. Because the way I imagine it is right now is like they've got a list of things they got to take care of, right? There's every bug fix you've ever submitted is on that list. But the problem is whenever something urgent pops up, like, the login server is broken or something, that goes to the top of the list and it pushes everything down. And there's some things on that list that have been pushed down for like 10 years, and they will simply never get to it. I would love if like 10% of their devs were constantly addressing whatever the oldest concern was, and the rest were constantly working on the most important, in their eyes, concern. 100% agree with them. I would love that.
At least give players a reason to do it other than do it if you like it. That way the new players can feel like they're cared for as well. So there you have it. That is my list of what I think are the worst things about Guild Wars 2. Please just remember, this video is not meant to be a hate-mongering piece against the game. That's not—
Oh, no. I've seen much better hate-mongering. You're fine.
What I'm trying to do here. I'm just mentioning some things that I think have become problem areas of the game that could see some much-needed improvement. So now I will ask you, do you have any other points that you would add on to this list? Do you agree with my takes or not? Let me know. Anyways,
any other things to add to the list? Oh, yeah. Visual clarity. The Boon Ball meta, yeah, I could absolutely add some stuff, but I think he was 100% right with almost every take he had. However, some of them, in my opinion, were very obvious takes. Like, you have to buy the expansion to get the expansion content, obviously. Some of the expansion stuff is very desirable, obviously. That's how they sell it to you. So some of the stuff I feel like was kind of like a no-brainer, but there were some other things in here that I think were spot on.
That's all for this one. If you like the content, please subscribe or become a channel member if you want to go the extra distance. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.
All right, that was pretty cool. That was a nice talk. That was Evan 4K, and once again, I will link that in the chat. So now that I know who he is, I will have to check out his other video where he actually said nice things about the game. Since I first heard about him when he started whining about the game. But that was pretty fun. All right, GG.